When a struggling single dad is denied a loan at the bank, the last thing he expects is for the elegant stranger behind him to pay off his debt, especially when he learns she's a billionaire with secrets of her own. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The morning light slipped lazily through the worn blinds of Michael Hayes's kitchen, casting pale streaks across the cluttered countertop. The smell of burnt toast mingled with instant coffee as Michael flipped eggs with one hand and tied his 7-year-old daughter's sneakers with the other. Emily sat on a wobbly stool, her curly hair still tangled from sleep, clutching her backpack like it contained the secrets of the universe. "Dad, I think I forgot to finish my science worksheet," she mumbled, her mouth full of toast. Michael sighed, setting the spatula down and crouching to her level. "It's okay, kiddo. We'll get through it tonight. One thing at a time." The truth was, they were always doing one thing at a time, because doing everything all at once wasn't an option anymore, not since Sarah died, not since Michael had to be both dad and mom, cook and cleaner, cheerleader and disciplinarian. His days started at dawn and ended long after Emily went to sleep, usually with him passed out on the couch, grease still under his fingernails. They ate breakfast in hurried silence, the clock ticking like a countdown in the background. Michael checked his phone. One missed call from the bank, probably another polite reminder that his loan application was still under review, which was just their way of saying no, stretched out over a few business days. "All right, let's roll," he said, grabbing his keys and slipping on his work boots. Emily zipped up her jacket and followed him out to the driveway, where their aging sedan sat frosted over from the night's chill. Michael muttered under his breath as he turned the key. The engine sputtered, choked, and then caught, barely. They made it to school with minutes to spare. Emily kissed him on the cheek before darting through the front doors, her pink backpack bouncing behind her. Michael watched her go, the weight of everything settling heavy on his shoulders. The bills, the broken muffler, the overdue rent. He turned the car back on and headed toward the garage, his breath fogging the windshield. Just another Monday, just another battle to get through the day without something falling apart. The bank smelled like lemon cleaner and quiet judgment. Michael sat stiffly in a beige plastic chair that had seen better years, his fingers drumming lightly against the folder in his lap. Inside were carefully printed pay stubs, a budget sheet he'd filled out late the night before, and a letter from his supervisor at the garage promising steady hours, if the shop kept enough business. A small loan, that's all he needed. Just enough to fix the car properly, catch up on rent, and maybe, just maybe, breathe for the first time in weeks. Across the desk, a young man in a pressed navy suit tapped at a keyboard. He hadn't smiled when Michael walked in. He hadn't even offered a handshake, just a quick nod, and the kind of look Michael had come to know well, polite, distant, and already halfway to no. "So," the banker said, still typing, "you're asking for $5,000? Michael nodded. "Yes, sir, just a short-term loan. I've got a payment plan worked out, and I've never missed rent. Things got tight." The man glanced at the papers, then back at the screen. That sound, that meaningless sound that always came before the letdown. "I'm afraid?" The banker straightened his tie, finally looking Michael in the eye. "Based on your credit history and current income, we can't approve your application at this time." Michael swallowed hard. "I've got a kid. I'm working full-time and picking up whatever side jobs I can. I'm not asking for a handout." "I understand," the man said, with all the empathy of a voicemail. "But the numbers don't meet our criteria. I'm sorry." Of course the numbers. It was always about the numbers. Michael stood slowly, forcing a thank you through clenched teeth. He gathered his folder, the contents now nothing more than paper reminders of everything he couldn't change. As he turned toward the exit, the glass doors ahead of him blurred for a moment, maybe from the cold air outside, or maybe from the heat behind his eyes. He didn't notice the woman in line behind him, watching the entire exchange. Didn't see her brows knit slightly. didn't hear the soft click of her heels as she stepped closer to the teller, eyes still fixed on the man walking out with nothing but his pride. Elise Westbrook adjusted the cuff of her wool coat, the line inching forward as the muted sounds of the bank carried around her, keyboard clacks, the occasional rustle of paper, and voices too low to catch clearly. She wasn't supposed to be here, not really. Not in a small-town branch of a mid-tier bank with scuffed floors and a pot of stale coffee sitting untouched in the corner. But her travel plans had shifted last minute. Her assistant was unreachable, and she needed to authorize a wire transfer before the market closed. The man in front of her looked out of place too, but in a different way. Worn boots, a jacket with a frayed collar, and hands that bore the kind of grime you couldn't scrub off in one wash. His shoulders were tense, jaw clenched in quiet determination, like someone used to swallowing disappointment before it fully formed. She watched as he slid a folder onto the desk and tried to make his case. The banker barely looked up. Elise didn't need to hear every word. She'd seen this scene unfold in boardrooms and investment pitches. Different players, same script. The man asked for help. The system said no. When he stood, Elise instinctively stepped back to give him room, though her eyes never left his face. There was no outburst, no anger, just a slow, almost reluctant turn toward the exit. The kind of exit that said he'd rehearsed this before. Elise saw it for what it was, a quiet kind of dignity, a refusal to let the rejection shrink him, even if it stung. As he pushed through the glass doors and disappeared into the winter light, Elise's fingers tightened around her purse strap. Something in her chest stirred, faint but unmistakable. She'd built a life in a world where people wore masks and motives, where every favor came with strings and every relationship had a clause. But that man, he hadn't asked for pity. He hadn't begged or bargained. He just needed a little air and a break that never came. The teller called her forward, but Elise hesitated, her gaze still on the empty doorway. "Ma'am?" the clerk said. She stepped up, but her mind wasn't on the transfer anymore. The cold hit Michael like a slap as he stepped onto the sidewalk, the wind threading through the holes in his jacket like it had been waiting for him. He pulled the collar up, tucked the folder under his arm, and started down the street with no real destination in mind, just movement. That was all he could control right now, putting one foot in front of the other. His boots scraped against salted pavement, and his breath came out in thick clouds. The bank's rejection still echoed in his chest, dull and familiar. He'd been stupid to hope. $5,000 wasn't even that much in the grand scheme of things, but to him it was everything. "Excuse me?" The voice was calm, clear, and unfamiliar. Michael turned. The woman from the bank stood behind him, her dark coat billowing slightly in the wind. Up close, she looked like she belonged in a city skyline, sharp features, composed expression, every piece of clothing tailored like it had a personal story. But her eyes, they held something different, something curious, almost kind. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said, stepping closer, "but I overheard what happened in there." Michael straightened a little, his guard instinctively going up. "Yeah, well, that's life." She smiled faintly, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I don't mean to intrude, but if the bank won't help you, I can." He stared at her, sure he'd misheard. "What?" "I can cover the loan," she said. "The full amount. No strings, no paperwork, just consider it done." Michael blinked, half expecting a camera crew to jump out from behind a parked car. "Are you serious?" "I am. Lady, I don't know what kind of game this is, but I don't take handouts." "It's not a handout," she said quietly. "It's a moment. One person helping another. That's all." Michael shook his head slowly, still trying to find the catch. "Why would you do that?" Her gaze held his, steady, sincere. "Because I can," she said, "and because you didn't ask me to." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Just the wind, the low hum of traffic, and two strangers caught in something that didn't feel like chance. Michael took a slow step back, his boots crunching against a patch of old snow. His jaw clenched, muscles tight with something between disbelief and discomfort. The woman, Elise, though he didn't know her name yet, just stood there, calm and composed, like offering to hand someone $5,000 was as casual as offering to hold the door. "No," he said finally, the word heavier than it needed to be. Her brow lifted slightly, not in surprise, but in quiet recognition, like she'd expected resistance. "You don't even know me," Michael added, his voice low. "You heard 5 minutes of a bank meeting and decided you'd just step in?" She didn't flinch. "I don't need to know your life story to know that you needed help and didn't deserve the way they treated you." Michael looked away, staring down the length of Main Street where the stoplight flickered red against the pale sky. His chest burned, not from the cold, but from the shame curling hot in his gut. He'd worked too hard for too long to let a stranger's pity be the thing that kept him afloat. "I'm not a charity case," he said, "and I'm not someone you can just drop money on to feel good about yourself." Her expression didn't change, but something in her eyes flickered. "That's not what this is." "Then what is it?" he asked, the words snapping out faster than he intended. "Because people don't just show up, throw money around and walk away, not unless they're trying to buy something." Elise took a small breath, then spoke evenly. "I'm not trying to buy anything. I just believe that sometimes the right thing to do is the thing no one expects." Michael shook his head again, slower this time. Pride dug its heels in, but underneath it was a current of confusion he couldn't shake. She didn't seem fake. She didn't seem like she wanted anything, and that made it worse, because he couldn't explain her, couldn't file her away into some easy category of people who take advantage or expect favors in return. "I appreciate the offer," he said quietly, eyes on the sidewalk. "But no, I've got to figure this out on my own." Then he turned and walked away, not trusting himself to look back. The house was quiet, save for the soft hum of the space heater working overtime in the corner. Emily had gone to bed hours ago, curled beneath a pile of mismatched blankets with her favorite stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm. Michael sat at the kitchen table, the same worn folder from earlier in the day still lying unopened beside his laptop. He hadn't touched it since coming home, but he couldn't stop thinking about her. The woman from the bank, the one with the perfectly pressed coat and calm eyes that had seen right through him, the one who'd offered, without flinching, to solve a problem that had been pressing on his back like a cinder block for weeks. And she hadn't asked for anything, not a name, not a thank you, just because she could. Michael leaned forward, fingers hesitating over the keyboard. He didn't even know what he was searching for. Elegant stranger bank angel? Sounded ridiculous, but she had to be someone. The way she carried herself. The way the bank teller's tone had shifted ever so slightly when she stepped forward. It wasn't just confidence, it was presence. Then he remembered the name she'd used when she confirmed her identity with the teller. It had been quiet, almost an afterthought. Elise? A last name, too. West something. He typed Elise Westbrook. The search results populated instantly. Michael blinked, then stared. The headlines came in waves. Elise Westbrook, the billionaire who vanished from Silicon Valley. Westbrook Technologies founder steps down amidst rumors of burnout. The reclusive tech mogul with a fortune to burn and no one to spend it on. There were photos, some from years ago at black tie galas, some grainy paparazzi shots of her slipping into private cars. And there she was, unmistakably the same woman from earlier that day, only now encased in headlines and estimates of net worths with more zeros than he could count. Michael leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. He had refused a billionaire. No, he had lectured a billionaire. He ran a hand over his face, a bitter laugh escaping before he could stop it. Figures. But under the surprise, under the embarrassment, was something else, a flicker of unease, maybe even wonder. Because people like her didn't cross paths with people like him, and yet she had. The snow came in fast, thick heavy flakes that blurred the streets and smothered the sky in a blanket of gray. By late afternoon, most of the shops on Main had closed early, their windows dark and handwritten signs taped to the glass. Closed due to weather. Stay safe. Michael wiped the sweat from his brow despite the chill creeping through the garage. The space heater in the corner was doing its best, but it couldn't fight the draft that slipped through every crack in the old brick walls. He crouched under the frame of a rusted pickup, wrench in hand, trying to get one last job finished before calling it quits. The storm hadn't just brought snow, it had brought silence, the kind that wraps around you like a thick coat. He didn't hear the door open at first. It wasn't until the soft jingle of the bell above the garage entrance cut through the quiet that he looked up and nearly dropped the wrench. There she was, Elise Westbrook, dusted in snow, cheeks pink from the cold, and wrapped in a sleek coat that somehow made the entire shop feel even more run-down than it already was. Her boots were sensible but expensive, and her expression, though calm, carried a trace of frustration. Michael stood wiping his hands on a rag. "You again." "I could say the same," Elise replied, her voice dry but not unkind. "Do you have a moment?" He blinked, still not entirely believing this wasn't some kind of cosmic prank. "Is your car okay?" "It's not the car," she said, brushing snow from her coat. "It's the town. I was supposed to be back on the road by now, but every route out is snowed over or closed. My hotel canceled power. And my assistant isn't answering." "So what, you're stranded?" She gave a half smile. "Seems so." Michael hesitated, looking around the shop. There wasn't much here. A busted coffee pot, a couple of folding chairs, and a couch in the corner that doubled as his nap spot on lunch breaks. But it was warm. It was something. "Well," he said finally, tossing the rag onto the workbench, "you're welcome to wait it out here. Not luxury, but we've got heat. Most of the time." She looked around, then back at him. "Honestly, that sounds perfect." And just like that, the storm outside wasn't the only one he had to weather. The snow hadn't let up by morning, and the world outside the garage had been reduced to a quiet blur of white. Inside, the space was a little warmer now, thanks to the portable heater Elise had somehow coaxed into working better than it ever had under Michael's hands. She'd stayed curled on the shop's ragged couch most of the night, using her coat as a blanket, her phone finally dead and abandoned on the workbench beside a half-empty coffee cup. Michael had offered to drive her to the motel once the roads cleared, but for now, they waited. The bell above the door jingled mid-morning, and in came a flash of pink and puffy winter coat. Emily, her cheeks glowing from the cold, school backpack bouncing against her shoulders. "Daddy," she called, pulling her knit hat off and shaking snow from her curls. Then she stopped short. Her eyes widened as she spotted Elise sitting in the corner. Michael stood from under the hood of a sedan. "Emily, this is Miss Elise. She got caught in the storm and needed a place to stay last night." Elise stood, smoothing her sweater and offering a soft smile. "Hi, Emily. It's nice to meet you." Emily studied her for a second, tilting her head. "You're really pretty." Michael let out a short laugh and muttered, "Emily," under his breath. But Elise grinned, kneeling down. "Thank you. That's very kind of you to say." "You don't look like you belong here," Emily said, matter of fact, as only a 7-year-old could be. Michael winced. "Emily," Elise laughed. "That's okay. She's not wrong." Emily edged closer, curious now. "Do you like snow?" "I do today," Elise said softly. "It brought me here." That seemed to satisfy Emily, who plopped down cross-legged beside her. "Want to see my drawing? It's a spaceship, but with cupcakes for engines." Elise leaned in, genuinely intrigued. "That sounds amazing." As they huddled together over a crayon-sketched masterpiece, Michael stood back and watched them, something stirring behind his ribs. Elise wasn't faking it. He could see it in the way her posture softened, how her eyes lit up with each of Emily's wildly imaginative explanations. She didn't just see a child. She saw Emily. And for the first time since the snow started falling, Michael wasn't so sure this was just a coincidence anymore. By early afternoon, the clouds had begun to break, letting a pale sun peek through the thinning snow. The roads were still slick, but passable enough that deliveries had resumed, and Michael's phone finally buzzed with a call from a parts supplier in the next town over. He hung up and turned to Elise, who was perched on the garage's old stool, sipping coffee from a mismatched mug Emily had decorated with glitter glue and stars. "That was for your car," he said. "Part'll be here in about an hour. Once it's in, I can get you back on the road." Elise looked at him over the rim of her mug. "Back to real life, huh?" Michael shrugged. "Or at least to wherever you're headed next." She didn't reply right away. Instead, she set the mug down gently and followed him toward the open bay where her sleek black car sat like a visiting alien ship in a sea of dusty pickups and battered sedans. The tow truck had brought it in earlier that morning, rear axle acting up, a sensor blown, and one tire nearly bald. High-end tech with a temper. Michael popped the hood and motioned for her to come closer. "You ever looked under here?" Elise smirked. "Not unless someone was doing it for me." "Well," he said, wiping his hands on a rag, "welcome to the other half of the world." She stepped beside him, watching as he pointed out the damaged connector and the worn serpentine belt. "You're good at this," she said quietly. He shrugged. "Been under hood since I was 15. You learn to listen before you try to fix something." Elise tilted her head. "That's a philosophy." "Maybe," he said. "But it works. Machines talk if you know how to hear them." There was a beat of silence before she spoke again. "And people?" Michael met her gaze. "Same rules apply." She smiled, something slow and genuine, and for a moment the air between them felt warmer than the heater could manage. They stood like that for a while, side by side, beneath the open hood, waiting on a part neither of them was really in a hurry for. By the time the sun began to dip behind the rooftops, casting long shadows over Maplewood, Elise's car was finally back in one piece. Michael had finished the repairs just as the delivery truck rumbled off, and the engine now purred like a satisfied cat. Sleek and smooth, no trace of the earlier trouble. Elise stood beside the open garage doors, arms folded over her chest as she watched Michael clean up his tools. Emily was busy drawing chalk flowers on the concrete just outside, her giggles rising every time the wind threatened to carry her scarf away. "I owe you dinner," Elise said suddenly. Michael glanced over his shoulder. "You don't owe me anything." "Come on," she said, stepping forward. "Let me at least feed you. You've been fixing my car, keeping me warm, and dealing with Emily's cupcake spaceship stories. It's the least I can do." He chuckled, wiping his hands on a towel. "She only tells those to people she likes. That's a privilege. I'll consider myself honored." They settled on Marcy's Diner, a no-frills place on the corner with red vinyl booths, sticky laminated menus, and the best pie in town. Michael had taken Emily there a few times when he could afford it. It wasn't fancy, but Elise didn't seem to mind. If anything, she looked more comfortable there than she had at the bank, or behind the wheel of her six-figure car. Emily chattered away, telling Elise about her science project and the time their toaster caught on fire. Elise listened with genuine interest, laughing in all the right places and asking questions no adult usually bothered to ask. Michael watched her as she leaned across the table to help Emily pick out a milkshake flavor. There was something unguarded about her in that moment. No press photos, no polished interviews, no measured words. Just a woman sharing a booth with a father and his daughter, smiling like she'd been invited into something real. After Emily excused herself to the restroom, Elise glanced at Michael. "You've done a good job with her." He looked down, a little flustered. "I try." "No," she said gently. "You are. Doing a good job." Their eyes held for a second too long. Nothing was said. Nothing needed to be, but the flicker was there now, quiet, cautious, and unmistakably real. The next morning, the snow had stopped, leaving Maplewood blanketed in white under a clear blue sky. The town had resumed its slow rhythm, plows scraping along narrow roads, shopkeepers shoveling sidewalks, kids dragging sleds behind them like prizes. Elise sat alone at a small cafe table just down the street from Michael's garage, nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee and pretending to read the local paper. She wasn't due to leave until tomorrow, and while the roads were clear, something inside her wasn't ready to go. Not yet. Her phone buzzed again, screen lighting up with messages from her assistant. Board wants an update. Press waiting on a quote. Should I reschedule Tokyo or cancel? She turned the phone face down, pressing her thumb against the ceramic cup to ground herself. No one here knew who she really was. Not Michael, not Emily, not the waitress who'd smiled at her like she was just another passerby in need of caffeine. And Elise liked it that way, because back home, or whatever counted as home when you lived out of penthouses and hotel suites, she was someone else. Elise Westbrook, founder, visionary, CEO of Westbrook Technologies, a woman constantly being measured by headlines, shareholder demands, and billion-dollar expectations. It had been 3 years since her name last made the cover of Forbes, 2 since she'd walked away from her company's day-to-day operations under the guise of personal wellness. But the truth was messier. She hadn't burned out. She'd just stopped caring. All the power, all the success, and still she'd come home to silence every night. No one asked how she really was. No one noticed when she disappeared, except the press, who framed it as mysterious, even admirable, a woman stepping back to find balance. But balance wasn't why she was in Maplewood. She was here because she was tired. Tired of being useful, tired of being handled, tired of being seen, but never truly known. And somehow, in the cracked linoleum floors of a small-town diner and the crooked smile of a single dad with grease under his nails, she'd felt something rare, something honest, something that made her wonder if she could stay lost just a little while longer. The garage was quiet, the kind of quiet that made every sound sharper, the low hum of the heater, the faint rustle of Emily's crayon scratching paper in the corner, and the rhythmic clink of Michael sorting tools at his workbench. The storm had passed, but the cold lingered. Michael had been in a decent mood that morning. Elise had stopped by early with 2 cups of coffee, one black, one with exactly 2 sugars, and sat with him for a while before heading off to run errands. Emily had given her a big hug on the way out, and Michael had smiled without thinking about it too hard. But then the mail arrived. He almost tossed the envelope from the electric company, assuming it was another past-due notice. Instead, when he opened it, he found a letter confirming payment, full balance covered, account now in good standing. Michael stared at the paper, his jaw tightening. There was only one person who could have done it. He stormed out of the garage 15 minutes later, coat unzipped, and breath steaming in the winter air. It didn't take long to find her. Elise was walking out of the cafe, coffee in hand, scarf tucked neatly beneath her collar. "Elise?" She turned, surprised by the sharpness in his voice. "Michael? What's wrong?" "You paid my power bill," he said, holding the letter up like proof of a crime. "Why?" Her face softened. "You mentioned they were about to shut it off. I just thought—" "You thought you'd swoop in and fix things I didn't ask you to fix?" His voice rose, tight with anger and something deeper, hurt. "I wasn't trying to offend you," she said calmly. "I just wanted to help." "I didn't ask for help." "No, you didn't," she replied, her voice steady but quiet. "Which is why I didn't put my name on it." Michael ran a hand through his hair, exhaling hard. "You don't get it. I've spent years holding this whole thing together with duct tape and prayer. If I start letting people patch the holes for me, what's left of me?" Elise didn't speak right away. Her eyes held his, not pitying, not apologetic, just seeing him. "I see a man doing his best," she said, "and sometimes even the strongest people need a break." Michael looked away, the letter crumpling in his fist. The silence between them stretched, heavy, unspoken, unresolved. Then, without another word, He turned and walked back toward the garage, leaving Elise standing alone on the snowy sidewalk. The next day was colder, but clearer. A thin crust of ice shimmered across the sidewalks, and the sky stretched pale and cloudless above the town. Michael was back at the garage early, hands moving on autopilot as he rotated tires and replaced brake pads, but his mind was miles away. He hadn't spoken to Elise since yesterday's blow-up. She hadn't come by, hadn't texted, and the absence felt louder than it should have. Emily noticed too. Her after-school drawing stayed folded in her backpack, the one she'd made for Elise, a spaceship with her riding shotgun beside Emily and her dad. When the bell above the garage door finally rang mid-afternoon, Michael didn't have to look up to know who it was. "Elise," he said, wiping his hands, "didn't expect you back." "I almost didn't come," she replied, her tone cautious but direct, "but we left things in a place I'm not comfortable with." Michael nodded, eyes fixed on a half-disassembled alternator. "Yeah, about that. I shouldn't have snapped at you." She stepped closer, arms folded. "You were angry. You had every right to be." "It's not about the bill," he said. "Okay, it is, but it's more than that." He looked up, jaw tight. "You see a guy working hard, trying to do right by his kid, and you think he deserves a break. But when you pay for something like that without asking, it feels like I'm failing at holding it all together." "I wasn't trying to take anything from you," she said gently. "I know," he said, voice low, "but you have to understand. For me, every inch I've earned, I've clawed for. People see a single dad, they assume I'm barely hanging on. I've had to be enough every day for Emily. I can't afford to not be." There was silence. Then Elise spoke, her voice quieter now. "I get it. Maybe more than you think." Michael gave her a skeptical look. "I've built an empire," she said. "Made more money than I'll ever need, but I walk into rooms full of people and no one sees me. Not really. They see what I own, what I've done, and not one of them ever thinks to ask if I'm okay." Her words settled between them like fresh snow, gentle but impossible to ignore. "I wasn't trying to fix you," she added. "I just wanted to make the road a little easier for a minute." Michael exhaled slowly, something in his chest easing. "Next time," he said, offering the smallest of smiles, "ask first." Elise smiled back. "Deal." The garage was closed, the lights dimmed, except for the soft glow spilling from the office where Michael poured 2 cups of coffee. Outside, the snow had frozen over, turning the streets into rivers of glass. Emily had gone to bed hours ago upstairs in the tiny apartment above the shop, curled under a quilt made by Michael's late mother. Elise sat across from him at the small, dented desk, hands wrapped around her mug. No one had said much since dinner, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet that invited honesty, the kind that made you feel safe enough to speak without watching your words too closely. "She was the one who kept everything together," Michael said suddenly, staring into the steam rising from his cup. "Sarah, my wife, stronger than me in every way. She'd make lists, plan meals, balance the budget down to the cent, and still find time to bake cookies with Emily every Saturday." Elise didn't interrupt. "She got sick fast," he continued. "Doctors said we had time. They were wrong. It was like someone hit the lights, and everything I knew just went dark." He blinked, eyes glassy, but he didn't let the tears fall. He'd done that already, alone, behind the garage, in the dead of night. "She made me promise I'd keep going for Emily." He gave a tight smile. "Most days I think I've kept that promise. Some days I'm not so sure." Elise sipped her coffee, then set the mug down gently. "My mom died 5 years ago. Cancer. We knew it was coming, but knowing doesn't make it easier." Michael looked at her, surprised. "She was everything I'm not," Elise said, a soft laugh escaping. "Warm, artistic, totally unimpressed by the tech world. She used to write me letters, even when I lived 20 minutes away. Said typing emails made her feel like she was talking to a robot. They both smiled. I built an empire after she passed, Elise added. Made billions. But the thing I wanted most was to hear her say she was proud of me, and that door had already closed. Michael nodded slowly, the silence between them deeper now, but filled with shared weight. You ever feel like you're holding the whole world up with one hand? He asked. All the time, Elise said. And in that moment, with nothing but lukewarm coffee and low voices in a darkened garage, they weren't a billionaire and a mechanic. They were just two people, grieving, surviving, still standing. The morning sun streamed weakly through the garage windows, turning the frost on the panes into tiny rivers of light. Michael was beneath a car, muttering softly to himself as he wrestled with a stubborn bolt. Emily sat cross-legged on the floor near the front desk, crayons scattered around her like petals, her tongue sticking out slightly in concentration. Elise stood nearby, sipping from a fresh cup of coffee Michael had handed her earlier. She was watching Emily work, quiet, focused, completely lost in her little world. For all her meetings, acquisitions, and interviews, Elise couldn't remember the last time she had just stood still and watched someone be themselves. A few minutes later, Emily popped up and walked over, her boots scuffing against the concrete. She held a single sheet of printer paper, the drawing bold and colorful, lines uneven but full of intent. I made something for you, she said, handing it to Elise with a proud grin. Elise took it carefully, unsure what to expect. What she saw nearly stopped her heart. The drawing was of 3 stick figures standing in front of the garage. One was labeled Daddy, another was me, and the third was Miss Elise. All 3 were smiling. Emily had even added stars around them, and what looked like a giant spaceship hovering overhead with cupcakes instead of thrusters. Elise stared at the paper, something thick and unfamiliar building in her throat. This is beautiful, Emily. You like it? The little girl asked, bouncing slightly on her toes. I love it, Elise said, voice softer than she meant it to be. Michael looked up from under the car, wiping his hands on a rag as he came over. When he saw the drawing, he gave a low chuckle. Guess you're officially part of the spaceship crew. Elise tried to smile, but the emotion caught her off guard. She hadn't expected this. Hadn't expected to feel seen in a way that didn't come with expectations or price tags. A child had placed her in their picture of the world, and for the first time in years, it felt like a place she wanted to be. Thank you, Emily, she said, crouching to eye level. This means more than you know. Emily hugged her without warning, her little arms wrapping tightly around Elise's neck, and Elise, who had once stood on the cover of tech magazines, who had addressed ballrooms full of investors, found herself blinking back tears over a crayon drawing in a greasy garage. It started with the newspaper, not the big city press Elise was used to dodging, but the Maplewood Gazette, a weekly publication with faded ink, a loyal readership of retirees, and a front page usually reserved for church bake sales or high school football wins. But that morning, there it was, her face. Centered beneath the headline, Tech Billionaire Elise Westbrook, spotted in Maplewood. What's the real reason she's here? Michael stood behind the counter in the garage's small office, holding the paper in both hands like it might burn him. The picture was blurry, clearly taken with a phone from across the street, but unmistakable. Elise, mid-laugh, walking beside Emily outside Marcy's diner. He read the article twice. It was mostly speculation, pieced together from online bios, business profiles, and quotes lifted from old interviews. But there it was, in black and white. Founder of Westbrook Technologies, net worth in the billions, once dubbed the Queen of Code. A recluse who'd vanished from the public eye 2 years ago, and now, here. Michael felt the paper tremble slightly in his hands. She'd told him so little. She'd let him believe she was just passing through. Someone burnt out, sure, but not someone famous, not someone who'd built an empire, and not someone who could have changed everything for him with a single phone call, but hadn't. When Elise walked through the door later that morning, her coat dusted with snow and a hopeful smile on her face, she knew something was off the moment she saw him. His posture was stiff. The warmth in his eyes, gone. "You didn't think I'd find out?" Michael asked quietly, holding up the paper. Her smile faltered. She stepped closer but didn't speak. "You're her," he said. "The one with the company, the jets, the magazines. You've been in this town for days and never said a word." "I wasn't hiding," Elise said, voice steady but laced with guilt. "I just wanted to be someone else for a little while, someone real." Michael's jaw tightened. "You should have told me. I didn't want that part of me to change how you saw this." He looked away, jaw clenched. "Well, it has." And with that, the quiet safety they'd built, over coffee, crayon drawings, and long conversations, fractured, leaving Elise standing alone in the place that had finally started to feel like something close to home. The days that followed unfolded in slow, quiet tension. Elise didn't come by the garage, not once. No coffee cups on the workbench, no quiet smiles from the doorway, no stolen moments of stillness after Emily went to bed. She vanished from his routine like a thread pulled from a sweater, suddenly and completely. And Michael hated how much he noticed. He told himself it was for the best. The newspaper still sat folded on the counter, a silent reminder of who she really was. Elise Westbrook, billionaire, visionary. Someone who lived in boardrooms and headlines, not small-town garages and corner diners. The woman who'd laughed at Emily's spaceship and sat cross-legged on the concrete floor? Maybe that was real, but now Michael didn't know where the line was between who she was and who she'd chosen to be around him. He tried to keep busy. Long hours at the shop, small repairs, pushing his body until his hands ached and his legs felt like stone. But distraction wasn't the same as distance. The hurt stayed, buried beneath every bolt turned and invoice printed. It wasn't just that she hadn't told him, it was what that meant. She could have trusted him, and she hadn't. He wasn't proud of how much it stung. Maybe it shouldn't have. But somewhere between her quiet generosity and Emily's drawing of the three of them, Michael had started to believe something different might be blooming. Something not based on pity or circumstance, something earned. Now it all felt tainted. A part of him feared what he'd become to her, a fleeting experiment, a weekend detour from a life of private jets and press releases, a charming story to share over expensive wine when she returned to her world. The mechanic who fixed my car and almost my heart. He didn't want to be someone's project, especially not hers. So he kept his head down, focused on Emily, and tried not to remember how Elise had looked at him that night, over late coffee, like she saw him not just as a man with calloused hands and past-due bills, but as enough. Because now he wasn't sure if that look had ever been real. Elise sat on the edge of the motel bed, suitcase open beside her, clothes folded with robotic precision. The room was quiet except for the low hum of the heater and the occasional rattle from the old radiator under the window. Outside, the snow had melted into slush, and the streets of Maplewood moved on as if nothing had changed. But for Elise, everything had. She hadn't seen Michael in days, not since he held up that newspaper with her name and face staring back at him like a stranger. The hurt in his voice had cut deeper than she'd expected, deeper than she wanted to admit. And now here she was, staring at the zipper on a suitcase like it held the answer to what came next. She'd come to Maplewood chasing quiet, chasing something real. And for a moment, longer than a moment, it had felt like she'd found it. Not just in the town's quiet charm or its snow-draped streets, but in Michael, in Emily, in dinners that tasted like comfort and silence that didn't demand performance. But maybe she'd asked too much of the world. Maybe wanting to belong to a place like this, to people like them, was selfish. She didn't blame Michael for the wall he'd built. She understood it. She'd built her own walls, after all, glass and concrete, guarded by security teams and quarterly reports. She had wanted him to see her, not the name, not the empire, But maybe that had never been possible. Maybe it never would be. A knock at the door startled her. She stood, heart flickering with hope, but when she opened it, it was just the motel clerk holding a message. "Elise Westbrook?" he asked, holding out a handwritten note. She nodded, taking it without a word. "Snow's cleared, roads are open. Let us know if you're checking out this morning." She stared at the words, fingers curling around the paper. She could leave. No one would stop her. It would be easier, cleaner, less painful than waiting for someone who might never come around. But as she sat back on the bed, hands resting in her lap, Elise realized something simple and terrifying. For the first time in years, she didn't want to run. She wanted to stay, but she didn't know if she was still welcome. It started with the florist. Michael was picking up a small arrangement for Emily's school performance, a modest bouquet of daisies and baby's breath. And as he waited at the counter, Miss Lorna, the 80-something-year-old shop owner with a memory like steel, leaned in with a conspiratorial whisper. "Shame that nice woman left town," she said, wrapping the flowers in brown paper. "The one who helped cover my niece's hospital bill last month." Michael looked up, brows furrowed. "Elise?" Lorna nodded. "Didn't say it outright, but I put it together. Few people carry a checkbook like that and ask for nothing in return." He blinked. "She paid for that?" "She heard me talking to the pharmacist about how my niece's surgery wasn't covered. Next day the invoice was marked paid in full. Never said a word about it." Later that week, it was Marcy from the diner who mentioned her. "She tipped every waitress $100, Marcy said, refilling Michael's coffee like it was just another Tuesday. "Didn't make a show of it either, just left the bills under the placemats." Michael said nothing, just stared into his cup. Then there was old Henry, who came into the garage for a routine tire check. "That woman, Elise, yeah? She stopped when my truck broke down outside town, waited with me in the cold for 40 minutes until the tow came. Brought me hot cocoa even. I didn't know who she was until someone showed me that article." Each story arrived like a pebble dropped in still water, rippling through Michael's assumptions. She hadn't come to town throwing money or seeking attention. She'd moved quietly, seen what needed fixing, and helped where she could, with no spotlight, no strings. He thought of the coffee she brought each morning, the way she listened when Emily talked, really listened, the way she looked when she wasn't being Elise Westbrook, billionaire, just Elise. And maybe he'd been wrong. Maybe she hadn't been running from her world. Maybe she'd been trying to find a way to belong in his. By the time he walked back into the garage, bouquet in hand and guilt tightening his chest, Michael wasn't thinking about pride anymore. He was thinking about what it would mean, what it would cost to let her walk away. The coat was hanging where he always left it, on the rusted hook by the door, frayed at the cuffs, with a faint smell of motor oil and old winters. Michael pulled it on absent-mindedly, still thinking about the stories he'd heard that week, about Elise. The weight in the pocket caught his attention first, subtle, small, something stiff tucked behind the lining. He reached in and pulled it free. A business card, cream-colored, thick stock, minimal lettering. Elise Westbrook. No title, no company, just a cell number printed beneath her name in clean, elegant font. But it wasn't the printed words that stopped him. It was what was scribbled on the back, in neat handwriting that slanted slightly to the right. "If you ever decide to take a chance, call me." Michael stood there for a long moment, staring at the card like it held more than ink. The note was short, but it hit him like a punch to the chest. Not "call me if you change your mind," not "call me if you forgive me," take a chance. She wasn't asking him to forget everything. She wasn't pretending what happened didn't matter. She was just waiting, hoping. And suddenly he could see her again, sitting cross-legged on the garage floor, listening to Emily talk about cupcake engines, laughing softly over cheap coffee in the office, looking at him like he was more than his paycheck, more than his grief, more than the life he'd barely kept glued together. He sank into the stool by the counter, card still in hand, thumb brushing over the ink. She could have left it on his desk, could have sent a message through someone else. But she didn't. She slipped it into his coat, like she knew he'd find it when he was ready, not a moment sooner. Michael stared at the number for another minute. Then he reached into the drawer for his phone, his fingers hovering over the screen. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't think about what could go wrong. He thought about what might finally go right. It was just after dinner, and the apartment above the garage smelled like grilled cheese and tomato soup. Simple, warm, familiar. Emily was curled on the couch, her legs tucked beneath her, and a coloring book splayed across her lap. Michael sat nearby, half watching an old cartoon flicker on the small TV, half lost in the quiet weight pressing behind his ribs. Elise had been gone for days now. The town had moved on. Snowbanks melting, routines returning. But the space she left behind hadn't faded. It hung in the air like perfume that lingered long after the wearer left the room. Emily didn't say much at first, just colored a sun with purple rays and glanced up now and then. Michael knew she was building up to something. She always did. When she had a question she wasn't sure how to ask. Finally, she looked over at him, eyes thoughtful. "Daddy?" "Yeah, Bug? Is Miss Elise coming back?" Michael blinked. The question landed harder than he expected. He sat up straighter, rubbing the back of his neck. "I don't know." Emily frowned, gaze dropping to her coloring. "Did she go away 'cause you got mad at her?" The room felt too small suddenly, too still. Michael leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. "It's not that simple, sweetheart." "She was nice," Emily said. "She liked my drawings. She listened to all my stories, even the long ones. She laughed at the space pig joke." Michael smiled weakly. "She really did like that one." "I miss her," Emily whispered, tracing a crayon over the page. Michael exhaled, the truth finally catching up with him. "So do I," he said. Emily looked up, hopeful. "Then why don't you just tell her?" He didn't answer right away, because pride still whispered in his ear, reminding him of the hurt, the surprise, the distance. But another part of him, one stronger, one braver, was starting to speak louder, the part that remembered her laughter, her quiet strength, and the way she'd looked at him like he wasn't broken. "I might," he said at last, voice quiet but certain. "I just might." And somewhere deep in his chest, something began to thaw. The garage was quiet after closing, the last bit of light slipping through the windows as Michael sat alone at his workbench. Tools lay scattered across the surface, but he wasn't working. Not tonight. In his hand was the business card, edges slightly worn from being handled too many times. The message on the back. "If you ever decide to take a chance, call me," felt less like a suggestion now and more like a lifeline. Michael stared at the number. He'd thought about this moment 100 times, rehearsed what he'd say, how he'd say it. Something honest, something vulnerable, something that didn't sound like begging, but didn't sound like running either. But now that he was here, none of the words seemed to fit. He looked toward the stairs leading to the apartment above. Emily was already asleep. He could hear the faint hum of her white noise machine through the walls, the sound steady and soft. She'd asked about Elise again at bedtime. This time he hadn't changed the subject. He unlocked his phone, thumb hovering over the screen. One press, one chance. The line rang once, then again, and then, click. "Hello?" Her voice was quiet, tired, hopeful. Michael didn't speak right away. His throat tightened, and for a long moment he just listened, to her breathing, to the quiet hum of her space. "Elise," he finally said. She didn't answer with words, just a long silence. But he could feel her listening, could almost picture her in some quiet hotel room, sitting cross-legged with her phone pressed close like she was afraid the moment would disappear. "I don't have the right words," Michael said, voice rough. "I've been trying to find them, but I don't." Another pause, and then softly, "You called. That's enough." They didn't say much after that. There were no grand confessions, no apologies wrapped in dramatic speeches, just silence. Real, unfiltered, and strangely full, the kind that spoke louder than anything either of them could say. Michael closed his eyes, hand tightening around the phone. He didn't know where they were going, didn't know if this would fix what had been broken, but for now, they were still on the line, and neither one had hung up. The invitation came 3 days later, tucked inside a small envelope that arrived by courier, crisp, handwritten, and unmistakably Elise. Michael had half expected a text or maybe another quiet phone call, but this was different, intentional, personal. Inside was a short note. "You said you might take a chance. I'd like to give you one. Come visit. Bring Emily. Let me show you my world, not the one in the headlines, but the one I've never shown anyone. E." Alongside it was a pair of plane tickets and an address in Manhattan. No expectations, no pressure, just an open door. Michael didn't say yes immediately. He stared at the tickets for 2 full days before mentioning them to Emily. Her face had lit up like a firework. "New York? Like in the movies? With the huge buildings and pizza slices bigger than your head?" She'd packed her backpack that same night. 2 stuffed animals, 1 coloring book, and a single hoodie, just in case it snowed. Now, standing in the lobby of Elise's building, Michael felt like someone had pressed the pause button on his life and dropped him into someone else's movie. Polished marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows, a chandelier made of crystal so delicate it looked like frozen rain. Emily, wide-eyed and spinning slowly in her boots, whispered, "This place is shinier than our whole apartment." Michael adjusted the strap of her backpack, trying to stay grounded. "Yeah, don't touch anything." They took the elevator up, glass walls revealing the skyline in slow, jaw-dropping layers, and when the doors slid open, Elise was already waiting. She wore jeans, a simple sweater, her hair pulled back. Nothing flashy, but still she fit here, like she belonged. Michael felt like a smudge on glass. "Hey," she said, stepping forward with a nervous smile. Emily ran to her immediately, arms wrapping tight around Elise's waist. Michael followed slowly, hands shoved in his jacket pockets. "This is, a lot," he admitted. "I know," Elise said softly, "but I didn't bring you here to impress you." He looked around at the view, the space, the life so different from his own. "No?" he asked. "No," she said, her eyes steady. "I brought you here so you could see the part of me I have never let anyone else into." And despite the marble and glass and skyline glittering behind her, Michael suddenly felt something familiar beneath it all. Her. The penthouse was stunning, sleek lines, soft lighting, floor-to-ceiling windows that wrapped the skyline in glass and silence. Every inch of it was tastefully designed, luxurious without being loud. It should have felt like a dream, but to Michael, it felt hollow. He wandered slowly through the open space while Emily played with a set of marble-inlaid puzzle blocks Elise had pulled from a closet that looked more like a gallery. Michael didn't touch anything. He wasn't sure he belonged here long enough to. Elise stood in the kitchen, pouring tea into handmade ceramic mugs. She didn't look like a billionaire in this moment. No designer labels, no boardroom posture, just a woman in her own home, barefoot on cold stone floors, pouring tea like she needed something warm to hold on to. "You live here alone?" Michael asked, eyes lingering on the unlit fireplace, the untouched corner bookshelf, the second bedroom with sheets that looked barely used. Elise nodded. "I have for years." He looked around again. "And it's always this quiet." She smiled faintly. "Sometimes I turn on the classical station to pretend someone else is breathing in here." Michael's chest tightened. He stepped into the living room, eyes scanning the surfaces. No clutter, no framed photos. Not even a coffee mug left forgotten. It wasn't just clean. It was untouched, like a hotel room waiting for the next guest. "You built an empire," he said quietly, "and you come home to this?" Elise joined him, setting a mug on the table beside him. "This is what success looks like when it's built on everything except connection." Michael turned to her. And you never let anyone in? People tried, she admitted, but most just wanted something, a title, a favor, a piece of me I couldn't afford to give, so I stopped offering. He looked at her for a long moment, the weight of her honesty settling between them. All the money, the power, the influence, none of it filled this space. Not really. It's beautiful, he said softly, but it feels like a museum. Elise met his gaze. It was never supposed to stay empty. In that instant, Michael didn't see the headlines or the bank accounts. He saw her, just Elise, a woman who had everything, and still came home to silence. And for the first time since arriving, he didn't feel out of place. He felt necessary. The next morning, the city was wrapped in soft gray light, the kind that muted the skyline and made even the tallest buildings feel a little smaller, a little quieter. Michael stood at the window of Elise's penthouse, sipping coffee from a sleek porcelain mug that looked far too fancy for someone used to gas station cups and chipped ceramic. Behind him, Emily laughed from the kitchen, where Elise had somehow found a way to turn pancake making into a game. The sound of sizzling batter and clattering utensils drifted through the open space, filling the apartment with something it rarely knew: life. Michael turned as Elise walked toward him, wiping flour from her hands with a dish towel. "You really don't have to feed us every meal," he said, offering a half smile. She tilted her head. "Maybe I want to." He chuckled softly, then turned back to the window. "This place. It's another world." "It's just a place," she said. "What matters is what you build in it." There was a beat of silence before she added carefully, "And speaking of building, I want to talk to you about something." Michael raised an eyebrow, cautious. "All right." She moved to the coffee table and pulled out a folder, sliding it across to him like a peace offering. "I had this drawn up before you ever came to the city. Wasn't sure I'd ever show it to you." He opened it slowly. Inside were blueprints, a business plan, funding details, a proposed location right in Maplewood. On paper, it was everything he'd ever dreamed of: a clean, modern auto shop with his name on the sign, his own tools, his own team. No more scraping by, no more waiting for loans that never came. "You want to give me this?" he asked, stunned. "No," Elise said. "I want to build it with you, as partners." Michael stared down at the papers, heart thudding. "Why?" "Because you deserve more than survival," she said. "And I believe in what you do, in who you are. I'm not trying to fix your life, Michael. I'm asking to be a part of it." He looked up at her then, eyes softening. This wasn't charity. It wasn't guilt. It was trust. And maybe, just maybe, it was love. Michael sat on the balcony just past midnight, the city stretching out in every direction, its glittering skyline humming quietly beneath a blanket of stars. The folder Elise had given him lay open on his lap, pages fluttering in the breeze like they were alive, asking to be believed in. It didn't feel real. A fully funded auto shop, his name on the sign, no loan officers, no rejections, no ceilings made of barely getting by. It was everything he'd ever dreamed of, and everything that scared him. He'd built his life around staying safe, not from danger, but from disappointment, from letting himself want too much. Because when you've lost as much as he had, dreaming big feels like standing on ice you know won't hold. What if it failed? What if people said he didn't earn it? What if Elise regretted the whole thing and walked away, leaving him with more than he could carry? He stared at the paper again, but then, behind him, the balcony door creaked open. Emily stepped out in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes and carrying her stuffed rabbit by one floppy ear. She crawled onto his lap without a word and leaned her head against his chest. "You couldn't sleep either?" he murmured. She shook her head, then looked up. "Are you sad?" He hesitated. "No, just thinking." "About Miss Elise?" A soft smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Among other things." Emily peeked at the folder. "Is that your new garage?" "It might be," he said, voice low. "But it's a big change." Emily nodded, then said something so simple, so small it cut right through him. Sometimes big is good. Michael closed his eyes, resting his chin on the top of her head. He thought of Sarah, of all the times they'd talked late into the night about what they wanted for Emily. A life with chances, with choices, with hope. He looked back at the papers, his signature line still blank, and then, quietly, he whispered, "Yeah, sometimes big is good." The next morning, as the city yawned awake beneath them, Michael signed his name, not just to the papers, but to a future that, for the first time in a long time, didn't feel out of reach. The morning sun spilled golden light across the front lot of the new garage, warming the freshly painted sign above the wide bay doors, Hayes & Company Auto Repair. Below it, a small crowd had begun to gather, friends, neighbors, even a few curious out-of-towners, all bundled in coats and scarves, their breath visible in the late spring chill. Michael stood just inside the open doors, wiping his palms on his jeans for the 5th time, trying to keep the nerves down. He still couldn't quite believe it. The clean concrete floors, the gleaming tool stations, the hum of brand-new equipment. It all felt surreal, like he was borrowing someone else's life. Beside him, Emily tugged at his sleeve, bouncing on her toes. "Do we get to cut the ribbon now?" "Almost, kiddo," he said, smiling, his eyes scanning the crowd. He saw Miss Lorna from the florist. Marcy from the diner brought a tray of brownies. Even Henry from across town had rolled up in his old truck, the one Elise had once waited beside during a snowstorm. And then, quietly, Elise appeared. She stayed near the back of the crowd, dressed in a simple black coat, sunglasses perched atop her head. No fanfare, no entourage, just her, standing with a quiet pride in her eyes that locked with Michael's for a single heartbeat too long. He gave her a nod, small but full of meaning. The mayor gave a short speech, something about local businesses and fresh starts. Michael barely heard it. His heart pounded with every breath. When the oversized scissors were finally handed to him, Emily insisted on holding one handle, her tiny hand barely gripping the polished steel. They cut the ribbon together. The crowd clapped. A few people whistled, but all Michael heard was Emily's laughter and the steady rhythm of his own heartbeat slowing. Something shifted in him then, not just pride, not just relief. Belonging. He turned toward Elise once more, catching her watching him. Not with ownership or expectation, just quiet admiration. And something else. Home. Maybe, Michael thought, this wasn't just the beginning of a business. Maybe it was the beginning of everything. The storm rolled in fast, as they always did in Maplewood. Dark clouds swallowing the sky. Wind bending trees until they groaned. Michael had been closing up the shop when the first fat drops of rain began to splatter against the pavement. Elise had come by late, her coat pulled tight around her and a small box of spare parts in hand, something she'd promised to help him source. By the time they got inside, the downpour was relentless, pounding the garage roof like 1,000 drumbeats. "Looks like we're stuck for a bit," Michael said, locking the door behind them as thunder cracked overhead. "Good thing I brought provisions," Elise joked, holding up a bag with 2 sodas and a wrapped sandwich from Marcy's diner. They ended up sitting on the old couch in the corner of the shop, the lights dimmed, the storm painting streaks across the windows. Emily was with a neighbor for a sleepover, and for the first time in weeks, it was just the two of them. No business plans, no logistics, just space and silence and the weight of everything unsaid. Michael leaned back, the soda cold in his hand. "I used to love storms as a kid, thought they sounded like the world was getting washed clean." Elise smiled softly. "And now?" "Now?" He looked at her. "They make me feel like something's about to change." She didn't look away. "Maybe that's not a bad thing." The words lingered. Neither of them moved. The storm surged louder, closer, as if daring them to stop waiting. "I've been trying not to want this," Michael said quietly, his voice hoarse. "Not to want you." Elise's breath caught. "Why?" "Because I didn't think I belonged in your world. But the truth is, it's not about your world or mine, it's just you. For a moment the only sound was rain, and then, slowly, Elise reached up, her fingers brushing the side of his face. "You've always belonged," she whispered, and that was all it took. Their kiss wasn't rushed, it wasn't polished. It was real, slow, hungry, and built on weeks of shared glances, quiet truths, and near misses. It was the kind of kiss that said everything they hadn't dared to speak aloud. The storm raged on, but inside the garage, all that remained was warmth. The conference room on the 42nd floor of Westbrook Tower was all glass, steel, and silence. The view behind Elise stretched out across Manhattan like a challenge. Soaring buildings, busy streets, a world she'd once ruled without blinking. She stood at the head of the long table, hands folded in front of her, every eye in the room trained on her. The board had been waiting. They always did when she called a meeting with no agenda. "Elise," one of the older members said, clearing his throat, "if this is about the media rumors, we can control the narrative. We've already drafted statements regarding your, personal travels." She raised an eyebrow. "You mean the part where I spent time in a small town and didn't immediately check in with you?" There was an awkward pause. "Elise," chimed in another board member, younger, sharper, less patient. "We just want to be sure your priorities remain aligned with the company. Investors are already asking questions. If you're not planning to return full-time, we need clarity." Elise exhaled slowly, then stepped forward. "For years, I gave this company everything," she said, voice clear but measured. "My time, my health, my family, what was left of it. And in return, I built something incredible. But in chasing that success, I lost sight of what I needed as a person. I stopped living. I just worked." A murmur rippled across the table. "And now," she continued, "I've found something worth protecting, something quiet, something real. And I'm not asking for permission to want that. I'm telling you, my life doesn't belong to this board anymore." "Are you resigning?" someone asked, a little too eagerly. "No," Elise said with a cool smile. "I'm evolving. I'll remain as a strategic advisor. No more day-to-day, no more press tours. And I will be selective about the projects I take on." Silence. "I've already built my legacy," she added. "Now I'm building a life." She gathered her notes, though she hadn't needed them, and walked out without waiting for applause, approval, or understanding. She didn't need any of it anymore. Outside, the city was still racing forward, but Elise moved through it with a calm she hadn't known in years. For the first time, she was running toward something, not away. The Maplewood air smelled like rain and cut grass, the kind of scent that made the world feel clean again. The streets were quiet, framed by budding trees and freshly painted porches. And as Elise stepped out of the taxi, a breeze lifted her hair, soft and familiar. She wasn't running this time. She wasn't hiding from board meetings or headlines. She wasn't looking for quiet. She was returning to it. Her suitcase thudded softly on the gravel in front of the garage. The lights inside were on, music drifting faintly through the open bay door. Elise took a deep breath and walked in. Michael was hunched under the hood of a compact sedan, sleeves rolled up, engine grease painting the skin just below his elbow. He looked up as she entered, surprise flashing across his face, but not hesitation, just a slow, quiet smile. "You came back," he said, wiping his hands. "I told you," Elise replied. "This time, I'm not leaving for the world. I'm choosing mine." Before he could say more, a shout echoed from the stairs behind them. "Miss Elise!" Emily bounded down from the apartment, arms flung wide, face beaming. Elise knelt just in time to catch her, laughing as Emily hugged her tight around the neck. "I missed you so much," Emily said, breathless. "Did you bring your spaceship pajamas?" "I did," Elise whispered, smiling into her hair. "And I'm here to stay for a while." They had dinner on the apartment's tiny balcony that night. Takeout from Marcy's, the table too small and the chairs mismatched, but perfect. Emily showed Elise her latest drawings, including one of the garage with 3 stick figures under the sign. This time, one of them had long brown hair and a label in crooked handwriting. Elise. Michael watched them from across the table, his heart settling into a rhythm it hadn't known in years. They weren't traditional, they weren't perfect. But something unspoken had taken root, deeper than romance, larger than coincidence. They weren't just learning how to love, they were learning how to be a family. The letter was folded into a crumpled triangle and tucked beneath a mug on the kitchen counter. Elise had nearly tossed it, thinking it was just another one of Emily's spaceship sketches. But something about the faint red crayon peeking from the edge made her pause. It wasn't Christmas. It wasn't even close. But children, Elise had learned, didn't wait for calendars to dream. She sat down and unfolded the paper carefully. The handwriting was lopsided, some letters reversed, a few words missing vowels, but it was unmistakably Emily. Dear Santa, I know it's not Christmas, but I didn't know who else to ask. Miss Elise is the best. She listens to all my stories and lets me help stir pancakes, and she hugs really good too. My dad is happier when she's here. He smiles like he used to. So if you're not busy, I just want one wish early. Can you make Miss Elise my real mom someday? Please? Love, Emily. Elise didn't move for a long time. The words blurred as her vision swam, tears welling slowly, quietly. Not the dramatic kind, not the heavy, painful ones she'd shed in hotel rooms and boardrooms. These were different, gentle, hopeful, like a door had opened in her chest she hadn't even realized was still locked. She pressed the letter against her heart, blinking back tears as she exhaled. She'd spent so long believing she wasn't meant for this, that her life was better lived in silence, behind walls, and under control. But this little letter, this little girl, had cracked something wide open. Elise stood, carefully refolding the paper. She tucked it into her coat pocket like it was made of gold. In the next room, Emily's laughter echoed from the couch as Michael tried to assemble a wobbly cardboard rocket. Elise stepped into the doorway, watching them, heart full in a way that had nothing to do with wealth or success. She didn't need Santa's magic to grant that wish, because now she wanted it too. It happened on a Tuesday. No fancy dinner, no champagne, no grand speeches under candlelight or sweeping orchestras in the background, just the smell of motor oil, the rattle of tools, and the hum of a quiet garage that had seen more second chances than most places in the world. Elise was sitting on the old couch in the corner, flipping through a service manual she barely understood, her sleeves rolled up and grease smudged faintly on her wrist. Emily was upstairs napping after a long afternoon of sidewalk chalk and spaceship games. And Michael, he was under the lift, finishing up a tire rotation on an ancient truck held together by more hope than bolts. "Hey, can you hand me that wrench?" he called out. She stood, grabbed it, and crouched beside him as he slid out from beneath the chassis. Their eyes met, and for a moment there was no noise, just the two of them, covered in work and time and love. Michael sat up, resting on his heels. "I was going to do this some other way," he said, voice quiet. "Something with less grime and probably more planning." Elise tilted her head. "Do what?" He pulled something from his pocket, small, simple, wrapped in a red shop rag. Not a velvet box, not polished silver. Just something that felt honest, like him. When he unwrapped it, inside was a delicate ring, not extravagant, but beautiful. The kind of ring someone gives when they've spent more time thinking about forever than about the size of the diamond. "I don't have a perfect life, Maya," he said. "I can't promise ease or luxury or a clean pair of hands every night, but I love you. I love how you see the world. I love how you make Emily feel like the center of it. And I want to build this life with you, mess and all." Elise didn't cry, not right away. She just stared at him, lips parted, hands trembling slightly. Then she nodded, yes. No hesitation, no fear, just yes. And when he slipped the ring onto her finger, her oil-smudged hand didn't look out of place. It looked exactly right. Because this wasn't a fairy tale, it was something better. It was real.